Helianthus tuberosus. Nickname for this plant is sun hat. This is part 1, and in part 2 I'll be sharing a mnemonic or memory technique to help you commit to memory the most distinguishing characteristics of this plant for identifying purposes. Be sure to watch all of part 1 so that part 2 is understandable. This is an erect plant, tall, 6 to 10 feet tall at maturity. It's thin, weedy. They do tend to grow in colonies, given its rhizomous root structure, which you will see a picture of later. This is a picture of the colonies in which it has a tendency to grow in. Has a remarkable resemblance to the sunflower, with the specific distinction of having a yellow center disc rather than brown like the sunflower does. This is the yellow center disc I was referring to. Each flower features 10 to 20 petals. Technically in botany, these are called ray flowers. They develop at the end of the stems. The flowers are 2 to 4 inches across. They have little or no floral scent. Some varieties of this plant can smell like chocolate. Regardless of the variety, the tubers or roots are edible. This is a picture of the bracts. They are green, and as you see have a somewhat lance shaped outline. It's important to notice for part 2 during the mnemonic or memory technique how the center disc is dome-like. It has a dome-like outline, whereas the sunflower will be brown and it is flat. This is another example. I just might as well mention here during this picture where the plant derives its nickname from, sun hat, because like the sunflower, this particular plant has, like I said before, a dome-like center. Looks somewhat like a hat. This would be the space in which your hat would fit into, whereas again the sunflower is brown in the center, not completely yellow like a complete or entire hat would be, and the center of the sunflower, as I said before, is flat and brown. Notice the hairs on the leaves. They have somewhat of an ovate shape to a lance shape. The edges or margins have teeth. They're somewhat hairy or pubescent on the top and the bottom. So are the stems. You can see some pubescence here on the stem as well. The leaves have a leather-like texture. They can also, or they do also, feel like sandpaper, very rough. They are 1 to 5 inches wide. They can be 4 to 10 inches long. They are more broad at the bottom than the top. This picture shows us how this plant's leaves are arranged in a very unique pattern along the stem. The lower leaves are opposite of one another. The leaves near the top of the stems alternate. This plant can also bear leaves that whorl, which basically means that they join at the stem in the same area or plane up to 3 leaves per section. So here we have 2 leaves, but the whorl will bear 3 leaves in this section, and there would be no leaf stem. This is a picture of the fruit or the seeds. They are called achene, A-C-H-E-N-E. The color is gray to light brown. They have longitudinal ridges or ribs. And they are about 1/3 of an inch long. Hairy or pubescent stems. You could see this also here on this stem. The texture of the stems are also very rough, like the leaves. The root system is rhizomous. In the mnemonic in part 2, I've incorporated rope, R-O-P-E, And the rope represents this rhizomous root system. As I've mentioned earlier, they have a tendency to grow in colonies. Above the ground, it would appear that each plant is individually or stands individually or individual plants, when in fact, underground, they are interconnected with this type of root system. This, by the way, is not the sun hat plant. It is just included to represent the rhizomous root system. This gives us another example of the rhizomous root system. The sun hat plant does have thin runners, but unlike this plant, whatever it is in this drawing, again, just included to show us what a rhizomous root system is, I'll just go ahead and mention that attached to the long runners of the sun hat plant, there are connected tubers or potato-like formations or growths which resemble ginger root. Here we have a picture of the tubers. Now, depending on what variation of the sun hat plant you come across, many of the characteristics are the same and they are used identically for medicinal and edible purposes. You may run across these light brown tubers or the reddish to purple tubers as was seen in the earlier slide. This is a cluster of them. It appears as if this plant stem was detached here. Tuber. This is another tuber here. This leaf represents just one of the shapes which the leaves may appear in, which is more of a lance shape. Again, it can bear more of an ovate shape as well, where it's not as broad on the bottom but can taper somewhat here. In the mnemonic in part 2, I've associated a football with this, which should remind you when in the mnemonic, when the football is in its entirety, the leaves can somewhat bear the shape of a football. And later, you will learn how the football is torn in half, which should remind you that the leaves can appear to be somewhat like a half shape of a football. The edges or margins have teeth, 6 to 10 feet tall. Lower leaves opposite of one another. Upper leaves are alternating. Notice again the rhizomous root system underneath, where they're interconnected. Long runners. Attached to these runners are the edible tubers. This has been part 1. Be sure to watch part 2, where I will be sharing the mnemonic or memory technique to help you commit to memory the most identifying characteristics of this plant. Now, to learn how to prepare these tubers. Visit survivalplantsmemorycourse.com. Click on Helianthus tuberosus. Helianthus tuberosus. From the list there on the home page, and you'll find methods of preparation on the fact sheet. Thank you for watching.